The following program is a videotape production of the Maine Public Broadcasting Network.
About this hunting in the daytime. Where I come from, down Washington County, we used to hunt deer at night. What we'd do is find a clearing where the deer used to tend, and we'd get up in a tree with a headlight and a rifle. Them deer would come out in the clearing. You shine a light on them, because all you could see was their eyes. You just aim between their eyes. Well, they wised up after a while, had to give that up. They got so smart, got to where they'd come out in the field still, but the minute you shine a light on them, every one of them deer would close one eye. Because I ain't deer hunting today, I'm after rabbits. Only got one bullet. I decided I was going to try to top Marshall Dodge in the story he told me the other night. You going to do any hunting this year? Rabbit season's opening for long.
Well, you know, I'm not much on hunting. I figured a long time ago I might just well quit while I'm ahead. Now, the first time I ever went hunting, I had the damnedest luck. I asked Henry Beale, I think it was, if he'd come over and show me how to shoot a gun. I'd never shot one before, and he brung over an old rusted-out .22. It was a squirrel gun with 2 rounds of ammunition. And he said, now, Marshall, he said, you see them tracks at your feet? He said, them is rabbit tracks, and at the end of them is your breakfast. Well, I said, I thought you were going to show me how to shoot this gun. Well, he said, experience is the best teacher, now go to it. And he clapped me over the back, and I staggered off in the woods. I looked back, I could see he was laughing up a storm. He knew I'd be hollering for him for too long. Well, I hadn't gone more than 100 yards when I come to the side of a big oak tree, and in a branch of that tree was 12 wild turkeys. So I fired at the base of the branch. I split that branch right in two. Turkey's legs fell in between. The branch snapped back together again and held them turkeys fast. Now I tore that branch off the side of the tree, put it over my shoulder, and struck off into the woods, following them rabbit tracks. Well, now I hadn't gone more than another 100 yards when I come to the side of a hill, and I must say I was some scared, because I heard an awful roaring sound. And I looked down the hill, and it was a bear coming up after me. And I heard a screeching and a yowling, and I looked up the side of the hill, and it was a mountain lion coming down after me.
Godfrey.
Well, I determined to take the bear on first. He was closer too, and he was too close for me to get off that last round at him. Couldn't fire, and he was right under the gun there. And he come so close that all I could think to do was to shove my hand right into his mouth. That startled him some, but it didn't slow him down. He kept coming. So my arm slid right down his throat. He kept coming, and I just pushed my hand right through his intestines, first upper and then lower, right like that, right round through. He kept coming, and my hand come right out the other side. Well, now, I reached up, grabbed a hold of that bear's tail, and I gave one hell of a yank, pulled that bear right inside out. Now, of course, that bear kept going, but it was in the other direction.
Yeah.
Well, now, at just that moment, the mountain lion, who was almost on me, he stopped dead in his tracks. We both heard a howling, and it was a pack of wolves closing in on the two of us. Now, I looked at the mountain lion, and he looked at me, and we figured that whatever our differences was, we'd better take the wolves on first. Now, there was a great, tremendous battle, and inside of 10 minutes, all them wolves was killed. Now, I looked at the mountain lion, and he looked at me, and we figured that whatever our troubles was, they was over. And, well, he turned on his heels, walked back up the mountain, and I turned on my heels, walked down the mountain, following them rabbit tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I hadn't gone more than another 100 yards when I come to the side of a stream. And I was about to ford that stream when I spied two foxes on the opposite bank. And I couldn't ford the stream because they was mean foxes, and I knew they was going to bite me if they could. So I drew a bead on them. I aimed in between, not knowing which one to fire at. I was about to squeeze off the last round when I heard a honking sound. I looked up overhead, and there was 12 wild geese heading south, and I heard a quacking. There was 12 wild ducks heading south. I was so tempted to fire at them birds, but I better take them foxes on first, I said to myself. So I squeezed off the last round, aiming at the foxes. Now the gun exploded in my face. I told you it was rusted out. And the butt of the gun flew north and knocked down all 12 geese. The barrel of the gun flew south and skewered all 12 ducks. And the bullet sped true to its mark, struck a rock, split it in two, and killed both foxes.
Oh.
Now, the kick of that explosion was such as to knock me into the stream behind, and when I come to, my right hand was on an otter's head, my left hand was on a beaver's tail, and my trouser pockets were so full of trout that a button popped off my fly and killed the rabbit.
Yeah.
Now, you may not believe that, but that was beginner's luck. And I figured that I might just as well quit while I was ahead, and I've never hunted since.
Well. You know, you mentioned bear. I had an experience with a bear one time, too. I was picking blueberries, and all of a sudden, this old big she-bear rose right up in front of me, let out a hell of a roar. I took off running, and I run as hard as I could. And I looked back, and the bear was still there. And I run for miles.
Running after you?
He was after me.
Yeah.
She was after me. Well, this went on, as I say, quite a little while. You know, the only way I could get clear of that damn bear after a while there was to run across the ice. It had just frozen over just a little bit. And it was just enough to hold my weight. But that bear weighed 400 or 500 pounds, and it wouldn't hold her, and she fell through the ice, and I got away.
Now, wait a minute. You said you was blueberrying.
Yeah.
And that would have to be in the summertime, and then you come to the ice, and that'd have to be in the wintertime. Now, that just don't make no sense.
Oh, well, I just forgot to mention that damn thing chased me from the middle of the summer till Christmas.
God, Kendall. Sometimes, you know, I find it awful hard to believe you.
I was just thinking the same thing about you.
Yes, I can remember my cousin Arthur. Now, he was one of them missionary types.
Mm.
He was skinny
Mm-hmm.
and born and raised in Boston. And we got Cousin Arthur to come up and decided to bring him out hunting just to test his mettle, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And we said we was going off to hunt bear. Just see how he'd react and see whether he'd get scared or not. And he seemed pretty brave, but we tried to see if we could rattle him a little bit. And we said, now come on, Arthur, we're going off hunting bear. Well, he said he's going to stay back. He was not going hunting with us. And we hunted all day long, come back in, we still hadn't found a bear, and he said, well, he said, I think I'll go out and see if I can't hunt you up a bear. Well, now, of course, we laughed up a storm. He'd never hunted for nothing. We said, go ahead, Cousin Arthur. Well, he jaunted off in the woods, his skinny legs are pumping up over hill and dale, and of course, he was wearing shorts.
Shorts?
Yes, he was wearing shorts, Cousin Arthur. Well, he run into a bear about a half-mile out. Well, he'd never seen one before, and he was so scared he dropped his gun. And he hightailed it back to the cabin with that bear right on his tail. And he run inside the cabin, Arthur did, where we was playing cards. And the bear run in after him. Well, now Arthur, he tripped over the sill just as he was coming in, and the bear tripped right over the top of Arthur and rolled, somersaulted right into the middle of the cabin. Well, Arthur, he jumped up and run outside, slammed the door, peered in through the window, and he said, there's your bear, fellas. You skin him out, and I'm going out for more.
Great.
He had the last laugh on that.
Yeah, I guess he did. He should have had that old 45-90 I used to have years ago. You remember that one with a long barrel on it? That thing would shoot so far I had to put salt on the bullet so the meat wouldn't spoil while I was getting there.
Kendall.
Say, did you have any frost out to your place this morning?
Frost. You asked me about frost. Well, this morning I woke up about 5 o'clock. Ain't never been a lay-a-bed in the Perkins family for as long as anyone can remember, and I jumped into my pants and pulled on my boots and headed down over them stairs of mine. Now, them stairs, I don't want none of them steep, narrow stairs where you break your damn neck going up and down them like a ladder. My stairs have got 12-inch treads and only 5-inch risers. And you don't wear no holler in the middle of them neither because they're made out of solid oak. And alongside them stairs, I got me a red cherry banister, and at the foot, a newel post made out of curly ash. And the combination of red cherry and curly ash, it's awful nice in the early morning light. Well, now, at the foot of them stairs, I got me a sitting room, and in the corner of that sitting room, I got me a red plush sofa, and at the head of it, a standing lamp with a circular burner and a cream-colored globe. And, you know, I don't think nothing of lying on that sofa, reading till almost 8:30 before I go to bed. Well, then I headed out into my dining room, and I got wainscoting all around that dining room made out of butternut wood. If you got yourself a dining room, you ought to have wainscoting, and if you got wainscoting, you ought to have butternut wood, because, God, it just gives you an appetite to look at it. I want to tell you, well, as I say this morning, after I'd gone through the dining room, I went into the kitchen to put the biscuits on that Maud prepared the night before. Now, I got myself a big black Clarion stove in the center of that kitchen, And it's got 5 or 6 controls onto it, and it takes more than a teaspoonful of brains to operate, but maybe that's why there ain't so many of them stoves around today. Now, I cook 3 or 4 dishes on that stove all at once, and they can all come out just about right. Over on the back part of that stove, or over on the left, is the searing part of the stove, where I sear steaks. A little bit further forward is the simmering part of the stove, where I simmer bones for making soup. And way up on the left, right up in the front of the stove, is the waiting area where the pork waits for the beans and the butter waits for the clams. And over on the right, that's where I thaw out the shellac for spring painting. Now, I don't burn nothing but rock, maple, and birch in that stove. And the smoke from that wood works its way right through the stove lids and through the pots and pans and right into food and gives it the best flavor, I want to tell you. Now, I don't mind telling you that that's one of the finest built stoves in the country, because they got that nice metal cabinet built right in on top of the stove, built right into it. And that's where most folks keep their salt, pepper, and spices and keep them dry and proper, but that's where I stuff my bills and let them age for 3 or 4 months. Well, then I headed out toward my privy. I always say that a fellow who ain't regular in his habits ain't going to amount to nothing. I got out that privy and I begun to think what a nice privy that was. I built it quartering into the wind, because it makes a mighty sight of difference with the draft that comes up through the holes.
Oh, yeah.
And I built the seat out of boxwood. You can sand that down with sandpaper. It comes out so smooth. And that boxwood don't get no cracks into it, because I can tell you they can prove quite startling. After I got through with the privy, I headed out toward my pasture. And I opened up the gate, and I looked down on the ground, and you know, there on the grass was just a little mite of frost.
You want your tea hotted up.
I sure do, yes.
This thing ain't working very good. Draft is bad or something.
Well, you know, I don't believe that the draft on these stoves today is near what it ought to be. They're positively dangerous. Now, I had a stove one time that had so much draft that it was dangerous because it had too much.
Really?
Yes. I built a cabin in the woods, and I built me a stove out of some old oil drums. I welded and soldered them together as best I could. And that stove come out looking queer. You see, the draft hole come in the top, and the stovepipe went out the bottom. Now, you know that's a queer-looking stove.
Yeah, I was just thinking it was queer looking.
But I knew, and don't tell me how I knew, that that stove was going to have one heck of a draft. And them fool guides who'd come over to laugh at me and laugh at that stove, they got to acting up, and I warned them that that stove, when it started up, was going to have an awful draft, and they'd better watch out. I went off to the woodshed to fetch an armload of hardwood that would burn real slow and easy. Didn't want to have no nuclear reaction on our hands.
Oh.
And I come back, headed back toward that stove, and the most awful roaring started up out of the cabin. "Who put soft wood in that stove?" I shouted. "It's going much too strong." they'd jumped the gun, of course.
Yeah.
They'd started the stove up. Well, I had an awful hard time getting back into that cabin. I had to grip the sides of the door frame, such was the suction coming out of that stove. And them fool guides, they was holding on to the insides of that cabin with their teeth and fingernails dug right into the walls, right like that, and their legs are flapping in midair.
Yeah.
Well, then there was an awful clatter, and first the lid lifter, then the stoker, then the shovel was sucked right in through the draft hole and rattled out the chimney. And then there was a terrible wrench, and that stove lifted right up off the cabin floor, come to rest against the splits of the roof. Then there was another ungodly wrench, and that whole cabin lifted right up off its foundation.
Boy.
Well, I knew right then and there that I had me a stove with one heck of a draft.
Mm.
Well, with great presence of mind, I reached up and grabbed hold of that damper handle on the stove, and I turned it ever so slow toward the closed position, thereby easing the cabin, looking out the window, back down to its foundations. And then I gently eased the stove back down the cabin floor. And one of them fool guides, who would by that time had returned to the upright, had the audacity to say, "You know, Marshal," he said, "if you had had a governor on that stove, then that wouldn't have happened." I said, "Governor, heck, you put softwood in that stove and not even the President of the United States is going to hold that stove down."
God, that wind's still blowing. Been blowing for 3 days now. You ever see anything like it?
Oh, God, the wind nowadays ain't nothing compared to what it was in the old days.
No, that's true.
I can remember back in the fall of 27, I think it was, the circus was marching through town. And we had a northwest wind that day, and a gust come along, just lifted that circus parade and plastered it right up against the post office wall. Well, so we didn't know what to do. We spent the rest of the winter trying to pry that parade off that wall with putty knives and crowbars. Never did succeed in getting even a part of that parade off the wall, so we just left it there as the poster for the next year's circus.
Well, you speak of crowbars. I remember one time a fellow was telling me, I didn't see it, he was telling me that the wind blew so hard down to his place that it unraveled a crowbar. Blowed 2 rooster feathers right through a grindstone.
God, that's hard to believe.
Well, if you want to come down his way, he says he'll show you the crowbar.
Well, I can remember that time when I had a hen and the wind was blowing so hard that hen was laying eggs into the wind. It laid the same egg 5 times.
Yeah? Getting any mud up your way?
Oh, God. Not like the mud in the old days, because we've tarred the roads and we've got drainage ditches everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
That dries the land out a lot.
Yeah.
But in the old days, God, that's when we got a little bit of mud. I swear, now this is a true story. I was sitting on the front porch in the spring, I think, of '37. Now, we'd had an awful lot of snow that winter. So it was muddy, no doubt about it. And I spied an object working its way down the middle of the road up on the hill. And I thought it might have been a cat, but it didn't have no tail. It weren't a bobtail cat, because there weren't none of them in town. It weren't a groundhog, I could see that, because, God, groundhogs run from one stone wall to the other, never down the middle of the road like whatever this was doing. Well, it got about 100 yards away, and I could just make out that it was a gray felt hat. Now, I swear that. It was a gray felt hat. And it was no more than 6 inches above the surface of the road. Now, freshen you up.
Yeah.
No more than 6 inches, as I say, above the surface of the road, and 4 hours later it drew even with where I was sitting. And I can tell you I was some curious to see who was under that hat.
Yeah.
Well, I got down on all fours, you know. I looked down under that hat, and God, it was Tuttle, the postman. He was going along, you know, not making very much progress, and his ugly old nose was sticking out above the surface of the road, and I leaned real close to his good ear, and I said, "Afternoon, Tut. Muddy walking, ain't it?" Oh, he said, "Heck, I ain't afoot, I'm a horseback."
God.
Now that was mud. You don't get mud like that today.
Good thing we don't.
You know, if I owed the devil 1,000 liars and he wouldn't take Marshal Dodge as a down payment, I'd consider him a hard one to deal with.
Marshal Dodge is not only the superb actor you've just seen, he is also a noted lecturer, author, and one half of the famous Bert and I recording team. A native of New York State, Marshall moved to Maine some years ago and currently resides in Portland.